Hi, everyone, and welcome to Going Beyond Gender. Today, we're going to have the conversations that we haven't really been having before in the Nordics. So to start off with, I'm Jessie. My pronouns are she, her, and I am Pleo's Belonging and Impact Lead. And I'm joined today by a wonderful group of people, but they're going to each introduce themselves.
Gorgeous. I am Beaux, and I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the Inclusion and Belonging Lead at Tiimo, a Danish neuroinclusion company.
Great. I'm Loundens, and I go by she, her as well. And then I work as a consultant for circular economy, and then I am also a co-founder of an association that works with trans people.
Hi, I'm Linus. I'm the managing partner of a venture fund called Inventure. We're a Nordics and Baltics focused seed fund in essence, managing about 400 million. So here, thinking about it from the perspective of investors and how we can help shape the direction where we're going as well.
Yeah. All right. So first of all, this session comes with a big disclaimer. So what we did as a group is before we joined you all here, we set some rules of engagement for one another. So what we aim to do today is we want this to be a safe space because all of us, whenever it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, we're all both teachers, but we're also learners. So there is, with this space, it's wonderfully complex. It changes all the time. It's about humans, right? And that also means you can mess up. So we're all here to be accountable to any mistakes we make today, to correct them, and to move on. So let's start off with one of those mistakes. What could that look like? So say, for example, I were to misgender Beaux, which would be to use their incorrect pronouns when referring to them. In that case, Beaux, what should I do?
Gorgeous question. The best thing to do really is to just correct yourself and move on. If you kind of dwell in the moment, you often make it more uncomfortable for the person. So really the important thing is just say you're sorry, use the right pronoun, move on. And if you have some learning to do, just do it in your own time, not in that space. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So, this topic is filled with a bunch of interesting complexities. And I think something that in the Nordics that I'd love to see more of, and that we're trying to bring in more and more at Pleo, is both humility, but also curiosity. So on the humility side of things, we are all, when we start this type of work, we are all both teachers and learners, right? We need to start somewhere. We need to try and just do something. But we might get it wrong. And we need to be able to own that, pick ourselves up, and move on and do better each time. But the other thing that's really, I feel we could just see a bit more of is curiosity. So if you look at this very important slide over here, I think we've all been through this kind of Wikipedia, journey. When you click on one thing, you read about a bridge that's collapsed in the 40s, and 3 hours later, you're looking at Batman and T-shirts and all sorts of other things. And that's the beautiful thing about tech. Tech is full of innovation. It's full of asking questions, solving problems. But I feel that a lot of the time with this space, what we see is almost performance anxiety. And people they don't really start the work because they're so worried that they're going to mess up. But that comes at the cost of all these communities within our organizations that really, they owe it to their people to do better and to become more inclusive. And if we let this idea of perfection get in our way, we're not going to move. And Linus, you and I have chatted a lot about that.
Yes.
But first of all, you're a straight white man, a father, Swedish. You're on our panel.
Yeah.
Why are you here?
I asked myself that myself as well. Obviously, we chatted about the fact that the topic is something that is very complicated. It's something that quite a few avoid chatting about it at all because they're so scared of making a mistake. And by God, I've made my fair share of mistakes, and I will continue to do so. I will own it though, and make sure that we move forward. So I think, from my perspective, at least, sort of as an investor, first of all, I obviously manage a small team of sort of 15 people. And on top of that, we have a portfolio of 80 companies that are active or something like that at this point. What we clearly can see, obviously, is the impact it has when we're in tiny markets like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, whatever. Anything in the Nordics is minuscule. So clearly, we need to adapt to where we push ourselves, we push our companies to basically, if they're going to be able to sell to a wide diversity of people and cultures and whatever you might have in that sort of realm, clearly they need to look the part and need to be super respectful of the fact that there are massive differences today, things we didn't really talk about a few years back.
Yeah. And I mean, this quote on the screen over here by Tim Cook is really highlighting the value of diversity, right? But specifically of you as an investor, when you're looking for a potential company and they're like, we want to be world leaders in whatever they're doing, what is the role that you see diversity playing there?
Yeah. I mean, if we look at some of our best performing companies, they've all basically had diversity to the core from day one. They've always looked at, we need to have people from all over the world, a mix of people, nationalities and whatever. And they have always been the most successful because they build where they're just harder to break, and they get more resistant on whatever might come their way. So we clearly sort of buy into this, and it's something that we're pushing. It goes usually on the board, even before we make an investment. We talk about how they're hiring, how they're building cultures, what are their values, how's that being enforced, like all of those things. Yeah. It's a critical piece of thinking, is this a company that can truly go global? Yeah. Can they really crack it on a global stage? Yeah. So we have to go there. Otherwise, we're just going to bet on small, Nordic, irrelevant businesses.
Yeah, exactly. And those won't win in the long term. Yeah. Absolutely. And then Linus, from a bit more of a personal perspective, I think something that's very meaningful to me is that you're sitting on this panel with us today. I love that you're here. I love that you represent a lot, the majority that we do see in the Nordics. When we look at a lot of successful business people, a lot of them do look like you today still. And what is the role that you see yourself playing in this conversation? What's the point? Why are you here with us?
Yeah, again, when you asked me, I was like, are you sure, Jessie? I'm not sure about this. So here's the thing, right? I think we can all have different kind of views on this. I've always been a little bit more of a pragmatist, as in I prefer not to speak, but I prefer to act. So if you look at who I've tried to hire and the kind of influence that I try to have on a daily basis, that's going to be more impactful than anything I say. On the contrary, though, very few people that look like me, clearly not flavor of the last couple of decades, we dare to speak up and we dare to talk about the importance of these matters. Yeah. So I kind of feel obliged that I have to play that part and actually bring it up and say, you know what, times have changed. Yeah. We need to change as well, and especially given if we're in sort of a position of power.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that for each of you in the audience, if you've been going, yeah, does it really affect me? Think back to what Linus just said, right? Yeah, it does. Each of us has such an important role to play to make sure that all talents feel belonging. And it's flipping hard work. So we've all got to do it, because putting that work on underrepresented groups to do it themselves is a burden beyond the pay gap, beyond the exclusion that people sometimes feel, beyond that feeling of just not feeling safe. So we've all got our role to play here. And thanks for bringing that across. And Claire, from your side of things,
yes,
when we started getting to know each other, I think we had a great chat when we were chatting about being a bit frustrated, honestly, in Denmark, but in the Nordics as well. A lot of the time you speak about diversity and people mean gender. And when they speak about gender, they mean it in quite a binary way. And it could be frustrating, right? And you and I had this really good chat about intersectionality, about what happens if you're part of multiple identities. What are the challenges and why are we not talking about it?
Yes.
So as a Danish woman of color, I'd love to hear your perspective of the problem of oversimplifying here.
I think, well, thank you for inviting me. I think this is very, very important to see more people of color on stage.
Yeah.
Because we're very often left out. When I was born and raised in Denmark, my mom is Danish and my dad is Ghanaian. So I'm part of multiple identities. I'm Black, just as much as I'm a woman. And that has a huge impact with how we choose to talk about gender. Gender is, how we talk about it in Denmark, very, very binary. And it becomes men and women. But within that, because there's so much more to it, it's more of on a spectrum than it is binary. And when we talk about gender in Denmark, it becomes white women and white men. And that means that everything that I experience as a black woman or a person of color is erased and is not even included in the conversation. And that means something that I might experience does not relate to the general agenda and therefore is not as important. And that's a huge, huge problem.
Absolutely. And I think something that we do see in the Nordics, unfortunately, is we have this, maybe it's unspoken, but there is this undertone of, oh, but we don't see color. So how does that play out?
Oh, God. Yes. So saying that you don't see color is just as problematic as seeing color. I want you to see my color. I want you to see who I am. I want you to understand that this comes with a lot of great aspects, a lot of great resources, and a lot of history. Saying you don't see color just erases that completely and erases the development the world has gone through. And that's just as problematic. But I also think Danish people, I'm Danish so I can say that, we like to say that we are all the same. We all do the same things. We all agree on the same things. And we have this norm and expectation. Like we have this Danish saying called, du er din egen lykkesmed, which is like basically you wield your own fortune. And that is true. But if you come with a different background, you don't have the same opportunities. And usually that comes with being a black and brown person. We usually just don't have the same opportunities just as our white counterparts.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people who aren't familiar with this, so people who are white, right, or not a person of color, what can be quite difficult is actually relating to what you're saying. So maybe you can give us an example of a microaggression. So like something, if you look at this graph, right, it's not like you're actively discriminating against someone, but there's a small thing that one does that makes somebody else really feel excluded.
Yeah.
So Claire, maybe you can play back a couple of examples of that.
Of course. So when we're talking about race, we usually see it as like one big thing. So that's also why it's very difficult to talk about racism, because racism in itself is also a spectrum. Because when people see, I'm not racist, I don't lynch people, I don't kill people. But that's not what only racism is. Racism is also microaggressions and conscious bias that you might have towards other people, and that's equally important. So microaggressions is something that another person might do towards you that is super off compared to a person of color. So for me, for example, because I am a brown person, quite often people speak English to me in Danish spaces. That will be if I go to order a cup of coffee, then they will switch to English. Or just the other week, I was at a cafe, for example, and this woman approached me and spoke English to me, asked if I would mind moving tables. I answered her in English, but I was like, wait, why am I answering you in English? I'm Danish. Yeah. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But it's things like that where it just, the person that does it might not come, like the intention might not be bad, but at the same time, for me, you're excluding me from being who I am, which is also Danish. So it makes me feel like I'm not Danish enough to be in the Danish society. And that really, on a big scale of all the people of color that we have in this country, imagine what it makes them feel like. It makes them feel like others.
Exactly. And imagine just the effort you're putting in every day to put on a mask, to respond in English and then be angry at yourself, like, oh, why did I do that? But that's just, you're so conditioned because you're just so, you're adapting and you're just trying to survive. So how can you go from just trying to survive to really feel like you belong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it is also something that we have a lot of coping mechanisms. I know a lot of people of color, a lot of minorities use a lot of coping mechanisms, like really trying to mask themselves as much as possible to fit in. Yeah. That will be downplaying, the way that they dress, downplaying their hair. For me, a lot of the time is curly hair professional enough in a corporate setting, or should I wear my hair up? So we use a lot of coping mechanisms to try to make ourselves blend in more, which is really just as problematic.
Absolutely. So if you're in the audience and you're like, oh, I see the problem, but I have no clue, how do I take it from seeing the problem to doing something about the problem? A little plug, tomorrow we're doing an unconscious bias and inclusion free train the trainer session where it's not perfect, but it's what we use at Pleo. You'll be able to take the training we use, you'll get the free deck, and I'll spend an hour with you where I teach you how to train people in your company. So if you want a tangible action from TechBBQ on how to be more inclusive, unconscious bias training is a really good place to start, and you have free resources tomorrow. So don't forget that. It's at something like 11:30 or something like that in the garden. All right, and Claire, there was a last thing we spoke about actually when you're chatting about these different ways that people mask and try to hide different parts of themselves. We also spoke about names and how sometimes people will try and make their names seem more Western to fit in. Yeah.
Yes. So with names, it's quite difficult because, we who have come from different cultures, or our parents come from different cultures, we bring a lot of heritage from that to their children. So they will name us different names that are really beautiful, but a lot of people might have a difficulty pronouncing, for example. My last name is like one of them. Like, people just refuse to learn how to pronounce my last name, which is Loundens. So I have just at this point accepted it. But I know a lot of my Nigerian friends who have national names change them. And I know a lot of my friends from Asia also change their names to a more Western name because they just don't want to deal with it. And sometimes it's just easier to say my name is Anna or my name is Clara instead of dealing with a person who can't pronounce your name. And that's also something we should talk about. Really pushing to learn someone else's culture and learn how to pronounce your name. Ask them, how do you pronounce it if you're unsure of how to pronounce another person's name. Just ask.
Yeah.
And they will gladly tell you because they want their name pronounced in the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually figured that out in our research last year on Belonging too, that so many people were just changing their names. And it was so hurts, right? Because the name's such a big part of your identity. And then there's the other side of things when we look at trans and non-binary rights. And then what we see there is some people really spend a lot of time and effort to figure out life-saving techniques, like finding a name that suits them and fits them and feels good. And then they've gone and they've done all this effort, and then people just don't use it. Well, I hate that you've had this experience, but this has been an experience you're fairly used to. So can you tell us a bit about it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it took me over 3 years to change my name in the 3 countries where I hold residence or where I'm from, and it's a really hard, really long, exhausting process where you're constantly invalidated, and then to get into a workspace, for example, where you're expected to perform, you're expected to bring your whole self to work because that's going to make a better team, and then somebody calls you by your government or your dead name, your old name. It is super invalidating. I've had this, especially in onboarding experiences, where I will share what my chosen name is, and now it is my legal name, thank goodness. But and then that doesn't get respected, and it's my first taste kind of what a company is like, and it's not a good one. Let's put it like that. So
I think, if we think of our own onboarding processes as tech companies, these are things we love to automate. We love to make them super slick and cool. And doesn't it just hurt a bit to know that we've tried to make them so slick and cool, and accidentally, without bad intent, we're taking someone's identity away from them because we haven't really thought through this whole value of a legal name versus a preferred name, because maybe we've always had the same name, so we've never really spent a moment thinking about it. So, Bøje, what can tech companies do?
Yes, so put on your innovation cap. Tech is all about solutions and problem solving, and actually a really good example of this is MasterCard's True Name credit and debit cards. So they've essentially created a system where you can have both your legal and your chosen name kind of be associated with one card, so it forgoes all the fraud aspects that may go with having a different name on your credit or debit card. But you can, if you're in a store, for example, it not only feels invalidating, but can be really unsafe for somebody. If your name is Harry, but you don't look like a Harry, it can lead to you being assaulted. Like it can have really serious consequences other than just feeling uncomfortable. And they figured out a way to create a system where you can have both names, and so you can feel validated and safe going into a store, but you're also not breaking the law by having a different name on there. So yeah.
I think actually how you told me how they came up with that solve, because that's such a beautiful solve, right, for a really big company that works quite slowly. But one of them that you told me about was that a diverse team helped to solve this problem.
Absolutely, yeah. MasterCard has trans folks in their product teams, and I'm a really big believer in the idea that diverse product teams create better solutions, because if you have a very homogenous product team that all thinks and looks the same, you're going to create undifferentiated products that don't actually solve real life problems. And so, yeah, MasterCard made sure to have trans people on the team. They also have a similar solution now for blind folks who need to differentiate between their cards, and it's just a really nice way to make sure you're actually creating products that solve people's real life issues.
Yeah, and maybe I can ask any of you this question. So what happens if the audience is sitting here, we're going, okay, cool, we definitely want to design our products, they've got to be nice and inclusive for all, but wait, our team actually giving it a think that 20 of us, we pretty much look the same. Who's got any advice? Who's an open card?
I can maybe answer. So I think this is a two-part thing. One is to prep your culture in your company to make sure that it's an inviting culture, understand what biases or things that you need to discuss in your culture first before you start inviting people in. Mm-hmm. Second thing is tokenism. Be careful with that. So don't just be like, we need a black person on this team because we've heard that we will gain more value and then we'll be much more profitable. Like don't approach it like that, because that is the wrong way. Mm-hmm. Then when you're recruiting, recruit and ask questions. But that's why you have to make sure that your culture is ready, so that you ask the right questions, and when you're recruiting, your recruitment process allows for minorities to come to the company. And that means bringing in different people, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different religions, different people of color, and different orientations, different genders. But it's a lot of work, and that's why I think the whole gender thing is just so easy to attack, because it's just right there. But it is so much work, but we can do it. I think there's so much potential in working with this and really trying to lift it together instead of just saying we can't do it.
Exactly. And to add to what Claire's saying there, say for example you're interviewing, and now for the first time you're seeing more diverse candidates, you've been doing the work, you've been building a more inclusive space. There's also value in something that we in tech do quite well, which is being transparent about it, right? Saying, hey, we know when you interview with us, you might look at the panel and you might not see yourself, but here are our aspirations. Here's the work that we're doing. This is how we're trying to be better. That level of people seeing that, sure, you're not perfect, but you're doing the work, it really matters. And I think actually, Bøje, you had such a wonderful experience onboarding at Tiimo that maybe you can share with the audience.
Yeah, so I am also a really big believer in tone from the top. So when I started at Tiimo, I kind of came in and the leadership introduced themselves with their pronouns. And I've actually never been in a place where someone in just such a small way signaled that they're committed to this work and they're passionate about it and they're willing to do the work that's necessary to make me feel included. And it was so nice. I've never had that experience, and especially as someone working in DE&I, I kind of expect to start somewhere and kind of find a train wreck, mayhaps. And it was already the work was already being done, and it just signaled to me that it is a place where I can feel safe. And I think also to other marginalized folks, it signals that hearing someone use use their pronouns to introduce themselves kind of signals that they're willing to do the work in other ways as well. So it goes beyond just a small thing of pronouns, and it expands. Yeah. So.
No, it really does. And I think that's a lot of the thing with this work is maybe another question actually on it. Do you think that Tiimo is perfect at inclusion? Like, is this a company that's got it waxed and they really know what's going on?
No, but we're transparent. So we know what we're good at, and we know that we have a lot to learn and where to improve, and we are continuously trying to do better. And that's also why all of our inclusion documents are living documents. So we see them as changing with the times and changing with the language in the space to represent also the wants and needs of the neurodivergent community who we work with. So yeah, it's all about humility and also, sharing where you're at and being really transparent instead of being like, I've got it all figured out, because none of us have. Even if you've done this work for 30 years, you don't have it all figured out. So.
And it keeps changing, right? So we've also got to stay with the times and learn more about it.
Exactly. It's a learning experience for sure.
Yeah.
And even the people that work with it for a long, long time are still challenged because we're developing constantly. You know, as human beings, everything's changing. So we shouldn't be stagnant in this. Like, we need to learn and continuous learning.
Yeah. I love this analogy. Just because you read one book on flexibility once, it doesn't mean that you're forever flexible. And the same goes if you read one book on anti-Black racism, it doesn't mean that you're, for the next 50 years of your life, just absolved of all your internalized racism. It requires constant work. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. I was redoing our unconscious bias and inclusion training last week, and I was watching all these amazing TikToks, right? Like, to actually figure out, I was like, how do we make it current? How do we tap into what's really happening? So there's also maybe just something from my side. If you're worried about, I'm not sure where to start, or how do I do it, and I have to take this so seriously. It's serious work. We don't laugh at this type of work. It really matters. But there is a lot of fun to be had in this work too, and not taking yourself so seriously as you're learning, and just being curious and exploring new things. I think that's a way that you take down some of this performance culture, this I must be perfect, and it helps you to have a good time while you're doing it as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And Linus, maybe you can lead us off with 4 companies now. They're building their teams. They're new. They're a 3, 4, 5 person company.
Sure.
So now that they hear this talk, they're like, maybe we should be a little bit more strategic with how we hire. Is this something that investors are looking towards more and more? Is there a stronger appetite for more diverse teams?
No, for sure. I don't think I've ever been in either in a sort of a conversation when we're about to sort of look at a company, or obviously if it's 3 founders, and they haven't even hired, they don't have any money to hire, then obviously you deal with that.
Yes.
And you bring it up at the first board meeting instead. But I mean, it's definitely on the agenda in that session for sure. Like, and it's not just us, right? Like, I mean, but it's not something that people talk about. Like, they don't talk about it that much, but everyone realizes that, like, for an ever-changing world, like, this is never a snapshot. We're just in transition, moving, evolving, innovating, and our industry needs to do the same, both us as investors, but also obviously the companies that are tiny today that are going to build and become massive global businesses. They can't, similar to what you guys said, like, they can't follow the same playbook as what was built a couple of years ago, or read a book from a couple of years ago. Like, we're still adapting. We're just like trying to figure out new ways to do it. And I think investors typically come with a fairly curious mindset. That's how we sort of make our living in reality. But it's sort of been blurred out sometimes. So it's more about also bringing it more front and center in reality.
Absolutely. And do you think that's a fair assessment globally, or do you think that's closer to the Nordics? Like, how far ahead or behind do you find the Nordics in this type of work?
I mean, I don't, it's a good question. I mean, I found, for example, when I lived in the UK, they were very much ahead of the Nordics back then. This was not a topic anyone had I've been in venture, like in VC for 11 years. No one talked about these topics at all, 11 years ago. Not a single person. They talked about it in the UK. So like, as nations, as regions we have developed differently.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you look at sort of the immigration waves and you look at how, nations are evolving, we just need to make sure that we cater to new audiences, thinking about how you develop products.
Yeah.
Like, I will not be the right person to think about certain type of products. I mean, because I have no idea. Like, I'm guessing at best.
Yeah.
So clearly, we need to have a team that can evaluate that. We also need to have companies that are looking at where are there massive opportunities.
Yeah.
So Nordics is doing okay, not ahead of the curve in reality.
Yeah. It was a really, perhaps a controversial point, but I told one of my friends from the UK that I was doing this talk, and I said, yeah, we're going beyond gender, the conversations we're not having. His comment was, we're not having these in the UK because we had them 5 years ago. Just think about that, right? We're not having, this wouldn't be a relevant topic if we were sitting in London. And we're the Nordics, right? We're supposed to be the ones that are showing everyone else how it's done. So if you think about that, if you need something to light a fire beneath you, then this is a good one to really reflect on. Yeah. All right, everyone, we're coming to the end of our time. Are there any final remarks you'd like to leave everyone with today?
You want to start, Beaux?
I think just the intersectional approach is so important, not siloing people by their identities, because like Claire said, then we don't really solve issues for anybody, or more often for the dominant group in that silo.
Yeah.
So it's really important to make sure that you're thinking about how different identities overlap to create these really complex systems. Yeah. Make sure that you don't just bring someone in to be your token person without seeing their other identities. And also recognize that beyond gender and the binary and beyond race, there's other identities as well. There's neurodivergence, there's ability, there's class, there's so many other topics that we need to start thinking about. For it to not be overwhelming, I think it is okay to go one step at a time and kind of work your way, but like it is really important in the end that we consider all these things that make us people. Yeah.
Absolutely. If we oversimplify like that, if we say, today, Claire is a woman, and tomorrow she is a black woman. No, just black. She's black. And then the next day she is something else, right? Each time she's one person. She's a human, and that's the reality, right? It's so complex that by oversimplifying like this, you're then missing out on actually who that full person is. At Pleo, we actually have 17 underrepresented groups in terms of how we look at diversity. So gender is one of them, right?
I think we haven't really talked so much about allyship, but I think it's a really important thing as well. And I think it is great to name yourself an ally, but it comes with a lot of responsibility, and it comes with a lot of action, not just words. And within that, I think it's also important to mention that if you are an ally, you do not set the agenda. That means that you listen to the people that you are allying with and letting them set the agenda. If that comes with a company, it means that you're asking your minorities, you're asking your employees to set the agenda for what is respectable and what is allowed in that company to discuss and what is allowed to move forward with. You as an ally do not set the agenda, and that is really, really important to remember.
Linus?
As we talked about multiple times, this is complex. It has so many, and typically you feel like, do I even dare to say anything? Do I even dare to do anything? Should I be someone who speaks up on any topic? Start small. Like, the way to get the ball moving is not by knowing how it should go in 150 miles per hour speed, is to actually start moving it 1 centimeter ahead at the time. Start small. Most people here will make mistakes, as have we. So keep it small. Make it something tangible today. I think that's the key thing. If there's one takeaway, then start small. Don't overdo it from the get-go. You'll get there. It is a journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, you three. It's been wonderful sitting here with you today. Thank you, all of you, for joining us.
Cool.